In this segment, what I want to do is show you how we build contracts in the playground using JavaScript. And what I've done here, I've opened an example. I've opened the escrow example from the examples in JavaScript. Now, what you see above the comment line here is a large import, and what this does is import all the Marlowe constructs as they're represented in JavaScript. So, for example, if I put my cursor over close, I'll see that close is a contract. If I put my cursor over if, you will see that if is a function that takes 3 arguments. It takes an observation and then two contracts, what to do if the observation is true, and what to do in the then case, what to do in the else case. And if we look at when, which is perhaps the most complicated, when takes 3 arguments, a list of cases, so each of which we'll take a look at in a second. It takes a timeout, which is a number, and what to do if we reach the timeout, which is another contract. And in the case of, let's just take a look at what cases look like. Each case has an action, for example, a deposit or some sort of observation, and a corresponding contract. So we wait for an action. If that action happens, we wait for a number of actions. When one of them happens, we do the corresponding contract. If none of them happens by the timeout, we do the timeout contract. What we're using here is TypeScript so that we are able to give types to things in JavaScript, and we use that to our advantage in building. Now, so we're getting this information here just by hovering over. But you will also see that we can get further information as we build a contract. And let's take a look at the top level here of the contract, which is requiring Alice to make a deposit. If we look at making the timeout behavior different, we could, for example, or we just want to complete it, we say here we get CL, we'll get auto completion, and we will, as we will see that we can do close. But suppose I put in close like that. I've not used a capital letter. I'm getting an error signaled here. And the reason for that is because we're checking types. This function close returns a void where what was expected here was a parameter of type contract. So if I use the correct contract there, correct, then I get no error. And indeed, you see that I've used something of the right type. Now again, as we saw with Haskell, how do we build our contracts in JavaScript? What we have to do ultimately is to build a constant small c contract of type big C contract. And what I'm doing here is I'm building this top level contract. It says when Alice makes a deposit into her account in Ada of a particular price, we then do the inner contract. And these are things I've already defined earlier. So inner, I've defined, so when Alice makes a choice, when Bob makes a choice, if those values agree, then we do the agreement contract, which is here. If they disagree, we do the arbitrate contract. And what that does is it asks for a choice from Carol. If she says refund, the contract simply closes and the money in Alice's account gets refunded to Alice. Otherwise, we get a payment from Carol. And these things have been defined above. So in writing this in JavaScript, the last thing we define in the contract is a thing, in the file is a thing of type contract. And we build, if you like, we can write that first, and then we have to go back and define things like inner and price and so on. And you can see these have been defined earlier in the file. And even things like Alice. Alice is a party, and that a party is built by can either be a role or a public key. And here we've got a role with the string Alice in there. So we're using this JavaScript constant to define the role for Alice. and so on. So as we build, what we do is really just use JavaScript to give us abbreviations, abbreviations of what it is we want to build finally for our contract. Now, you could define things in lots of different ways. We're giving you these imports, a constant like Ada, which is a constant token. We're giving you choice, we're giving you deposits and so on. So we're giving all the building blocks. You could put those together in whatever way you wish, as long as what you do at the end of your file is to build something called contract of type, capital contract. And when that's done, we can, just as we did for Haskell, we can choose to compile it. And it gets converted into pure Marlowe, and then we can send it to the simulator. And we'll be adding very soon, send it directly to Blockly. We can send it to the simulator here, and then if we want to see it in Blockly, we can go and view it in the Blockly editor. Go back to the simulator, and as you can see here, once we're in the simulator, we can still go back and edit the JavaScript source. So the system remembers that we're editing JavaScript, so lets us go back to JavaScript. Okay, so I think that has covered what I wanted to cover for building Marlowe contracts in JavaScript. What we'll do next is look at how you do it directly in Marlowe and in Blockly.